Hi everyone, so this is the poetry revision video where I'll be going through some of the PowerPoint that I produced a little while ago for my classes. If you don't have this PowerPoint and you've seen this video and you think, where do I get this PowerPoint from? Send me an email and I'll share it with you if you need it. But if you're in my class, you will definitely have this PowerPoint. So just without further ado, I'm going to start talking about the poetry section then. So I'm just going to start sharing my screen now. You should be able to see everything. Now, just in the same way as I've done the Of Mice and Men videos, I'll be showing you a little bit of the structure, how to go about structuring a poem, but also discussing how you analyze poems and just talking you through some of the fundamentals to remember. Okay, so first of all then, this is the PowerPoint that I've produced for my group. It has in here links to each of the four sections that I really think are super important when analysing poetry. You've got understanding tentative language, and if you're not sure what tentative means, we'll come to that very shortly. What a connotation is and how do you explore it, recognising techniques and their impact, and finally there's a comparison with structure towards the end. So as it's shown here on the roadmap, the idea is that we're going to explore what tentative language is, exploring a range of poetry and using that tentative language to analyze it. And then finally, to be successful, we need to be able to apply this to our own comparison work. So being tentative essentially just means using language that shows you aren't sure about something. So for example, saying things like perhaps this or the writer may have done this shows that you aren't 100% sure. And as I say to my classes all the time, you cannot be 100% sure when analysing poetry. You can't say you definitely believe something because you don't know. You don't know the poet's thoughts. You don't know their intentions behind the poem. So you can't be definite. You have to be tentative and you have to think about it from the perspective of someone who might not have any prior knowledge of the poet or the poem itself. Even if you knew some context about it and you've read the poem before and you know exactly what they're talking about, you still need to be tentative because the idea of the unseen poetry section is that you haven't seen these poems before and you're coming at them with a fresh pair of eyes. So it just means being tentative means you aren't sure. You're all about interpreting a meaning, not knowing for certain. And this is where your AO2 marks come from in the exam. You are analysing the language that you pick out. Sometimes it's language, sometimes it's structure, sometimes it's form, sometimes it's rhyme, so on and so forth. So bearing that in mind, there's a part of a poem here called Pike, which is by Ted Hughes, very famous poem. And it says, Pike 3 inches long, perfect. Pike in all parts, green tigering the gold. Killers from the egg, the malevolent aged grin, they dance on the surface among the flies. So what do we know then? Well, we know the poem's about a pike and he is described as dancing on the surface. But then I'm going to use my tentative language to define what that means or what I can tell from what's written. So using my inference skills. So the poet has described the pike as dancing on the surface, which could suggest the pike is an agile predator. Additionally, it could be interpreted that the pike being among flies makes it seem like death follows it, as flies are usually attracted to death. The poem hasn't said the pike dances on the surface amongst the flies because he likes death. I've inferred that. I have made a link between the idea of flies around the surface and the idea of death, because usually bodies have flies around them if they've been left out, obviously. So that is my own idea and my own tentative judgment based on it. There's an activity here which I have asked my classes to do their own tentative judgments based on the next stanza of the poem. I'm not going to do that today, but if you want to have a look at it and you want to have a go and pause this video now, that would be fine as well. But the idea is that you would read into, say, 100 feet long in their world, and you'd think, okay, if they're 100 feet long, how big would that be? And also, when it says in their world and finishes with a full stop, what might that say about the way the pike perceives itself or how it sees itself in amongst this small body of fish? So, to be really clear on tentative language, it's all about sort of estimating what you think they were talking about or what you think they're saying. And you cannot at all be wrong when it comes to analysing poetry. Whatever your interpretation is and however you see the poem cannot be wrong. The only thing is you need to be able to back it up with your own justification for it. So it's no use just saying I think this. You need to justify it. Tell me why you think that is. You can't be wrong as long as you tell me why you believe something. Okay? Everyone has their own interpretation of poems. Everyone has a very widely different idea of what something might mean to them. And that is allowed for in this exam. You can be tentative and can have your own interpretations. It's not about having a right idea. This is different to Of Mice and Men, because in Of Mice and Men, if you said George was a big guy and my interpretation of him is that he's a big guy, he's not. And it's described so in the book that he's not a big guy. You couldn't get away with that. Whereas in poetry, you absolutely can. Okay, so there are two poems here that I'd like you to have a look at when analysing, and start thinking about making those tentative judgments immediately. That's probably the first thing I would do, aside from looking at the title, when I'm annotating a poem. It's just coming up with some ideas of what could they mean, or what I could interpret. The techniques and recognition of them could come later, but obviously as you go through, if you recognise techniques, point them out, and then tell me why. Why do you think they're being used? So as an example, there are two poems here, Proximity and You Saved Me. I'll read them to you, and then we'll start talking about how we would go about analysing them. Proximity. We joined the dots from A to B, the line we drew from you to me, traced empty shores across the sea, over mountain top, past forest tree, along the roads and walking tracks, all bridges burned, no looking back. For the love we have, no gate can stop, no barking dog or bolted lock. For what is real is meant to be when two hearts beat in proximity. And the other poem, You Saved Me. You are my recovery, my light upon the rocks. You stole away my agony, your soothing words accost. Naivety once failed me, the pain I couldn't speak. Alone I wept my loneliness, tears trailing down my cheeks. My heart I wrapped up tightly, a tourniquet I used. I couldn't risk deceit or lies, a trait of the abused. My lonely story ended, for when you came on my scene, for you became my lighthouse and I a ship upon the sea. I'll never need a tourniquet as long as you're nearby. Deprivation leaves me, sadness waves goodbye. Okay, so two quite different poems, but they have similar themes and ideas. So what I would probably do is start with poem A, so in this case it's Proximity, and start coming up with some ideas related to that poem. What can I immediately figure out from it? What could they mean with what they've said? First of all, if you look at the way that it's structured, we've got one line here. The rest of it is all one stanza, and it's all indented from the very first line. Now, you could interpret this as being quite a flowing poem, because there aren't very many full stops throughout here. It sort of carries on. There's a bit of enjambment, such as along the roads and walking tracks, but they have end-stopped lines, and it creates quite a pace to the poem. So we joined the dots from A to B, the line we drew from you to me. It has quite a pace. And now we know that this is, when two hearts beat in proximity, the idea of a beating heart. The poem almost matches the idea of a beating heart. We joined the dots from A to B, the line we drew from you to me. It's so not only is the poem strictly about love and the idea of being close to somebody, but the actual rhythm and the pace of the poem matches what it's talking about. And this is something that you could interpret. That's my interpretation. I think it sounds like a heartbeat. You might think, Mr. Green, that is ridiculous. And you might go for something totally different. You might just like the way it paces itself, and it sounds quite flowing and quite lyrical. Therefore, it's almost like a song, like you're singing to somebody who is in close proximity to you, that you're in love with. And that would be a totally valid interpretation. But when I write my idea or my argument, I might say something like this. The rhythm of the poem establishes the idea of a heartbeat. Due to the syllables per line. Now, you might think, sir, you've just gone through that, you've just given me a line there, that sounds like a really valid point. However, what I haven't done is say and use my tentative language. I've said the rhythm of the poem establishes, meaning I'm being very certain. which I can't be because I don't know. It's just my own idea. So I might say that the poem could indicate the idea of a heartbeat due to the syllables per line. Yeah? It seems to create a flow that links to the message of the poem. Love. Now my argument is far better than it was earlier because now I'm using could. I'm not just saying this establishes, I'm saying this might or this could do that. So that's just me demonstrating how to use that tentative language when you're analysing a poem. What I would do now is, when this video ends, have a look at both of those poems and make those tentative judgments. And then in the next video, I'm going to be talking about something slightly different, which is trying to pull away connotations from a poem. So I'll stop sharing now. Thank you very much for listening to this. And hopefully that's helped you establish one of the key fundamentals of poetry, which is using your tentative language. Thank you for listening.